skills development. And I work in the division responsible for policy and lifelong learning system, which is led by Mr. Boren Chakroun, as you certainly know. So my role here will be to provide you with some opening remarks, and then there will be several sessions on which I will come back in a later stage. So again, thank you to all for joining us to this great webinar. As you know, it's a joint interagency webinar organized by the Interagency Group on TVET, in short IEG, if I use this usual name in my former work. So it's a joint webinar, and you certainly saw the concept note before joining us. And of course, this webinar is placed under our response, our joint response regarding the COVID-19 crisis that we are all engaged in around the world. So first and shortly, I will say as an introduction some key words about the global objective of this webinar. That is, of course, to provide you with interesting discussion and thinking, and also so that you can share also your view, your material, and your resources. You can do it in the chat on Zoom. And the global objective is to share the result of a global survey that was conducted by 10 development partners who are all belonging to the Interagency Group on TVET, and in the framework of our joint response to the COVID-19 crisis. Of course, this webinar is not a standalone event. It is a part of a global process of many actions conducted by all the partners. And there are many webinars. You follow some previously. We organized as UNESCO TVET webinar beginning of May on the TVET, on the COVID-19 crisis regarding TVET, but there are also other webinars organized by other organizations in the Interagency Group, like the ones that the European Commission will organize in the next week. So before giving the floor to our great speakers, let me share some additional opening remarks on both 2 points. The first is about the Interagency Group that you may maybe better know, so I will provide you with some information here in this slide, and also some preliminary elements about the global survey that will be shared during this webinar, and the discussion will build on this sharing. So globally, the Interagency Group is a group that was created in 2009 by UNESCO, and it's led by UNESCO. Its global objective is to provide, of course, a lot of thinking and knowledge sharing among a large number of international organizations, but also including key stakeholders like regional banks. I mean, for example, to ADB, FDB, and other banks. So it's a mix of various types of organization. And this knowledge sharing has, of course, a global objective that is to ensure an effective coordination of our thinking, our positioning, our way to act to support the country, because supporting country is our ultimate goal. And of course, supporting countries, that means that we want to be better coordinated to move forward on the agenda regarding productivity, sustainable development, and employment opportunities. More concretely, it means also that we want to be better coordinated in specific action to support your countries. And it can be through policy support, it can be through specific projects, extrabudgetary projects that we can jointly or specifically conduct together. So just to in short, that to synthesize that the main objective is to be better coordinated, to act with more efficiency. Just also to recall that this Interagency Group has so this way of to be practical. So there are 3 working groups. The first one is about world-based learning. The second one is about more data-oriented regarding indicators on TVET. with the aim to avoid the skills mismatch between skill supply and demand. And the third group for now is about greening TVET. I would also to add that these groups are not fixed. They evolve regarding the global situation on TVET, regarding new trends, regarding new opportunities and demands from new countries. That's why it can always evolve to be the most efficient and in line with the needs. So next slide, please. So I will go quickly on key achievements so that you can see more concretely the achievement of the interagency group. And let me share in a few main blocks. The first one is related to the international and regional cooperation as a key achievement of the group. And there you can see here the main elements. The regional coordination and international coordination can be related to global events like the participation and the active involvement of the interagency group for the third international congress held in Shanghai in 2012. So it was a great achievement. There are also inputs for joint review, for example, of global trends and issues related to TVET. Some inputs, for example, for the G20 action plan related to the human resources pillar. And I think I would like to highlight that this group has played an important and critical role to better position TVET in the global international agenda. I mean the 2030 agenda related to all the sustainable development goal. And you can see now, and you know that TVET is well positioned in SDG 4 related to education, but also it is in line with the other SDG. So the interagency group has played an important role on this. There are key achievements also related to the working group. We can highlight, for example, some work to get a better joint understanding and way of acting together on word-based learning. For example, a leaflet regarding career guidance and counseling was finalized and shared among the TVET community around the world. There was some policy brief, there was some the frameworks that were developed and used to support the countries. There are also great joint work in terms of research and publication. I cannot highlight all what was achieved, but I can highlight, for example, the two joint publications between ILO and UNESCO that are undergoing regarding the digitalization, but also the review of learning entitlement. Of course, there are also specific, publication undertaken by specific agency in the interagency group, and they are placed, even if they are from one partner, they are placed in the interagency group framework, and these publications are discussed to be very coherent with the global thinking and the way of acting. And the last is, of course, that the interagency group organize a key TVET event. It can be, for example, the webinars I previously cite, but also the next that will come, and some production regarding knowledge. Next slide, please. So that was my initial sharing regarding interagency group. But we can say in a normal world, and we know that we are no more in a normal world with this COVID-19 crisis. So we have to focus on this crisis. So what is the work that is undertakes for now the interagency group related to the crisis? I cannot give you here in a short time all the action, but I would like to highlight that the group has initiated at least 3 main global surveys. The first one is about TVET providers. It's a joint survey between ILO, UNESCO, World Bank, and other partners. The second one is the one that we will discuss today. I won't go into too more details because my colleague Ashwani Agarwal will then provide you his keynote speech about the sharing of this survey. So you you will have all the information. The third one is about, it's just starting, and it's about career guidance policy and practices, and it involves no more than 7 organizations like CDFOP, European Commission, ETF, European Commission and ETF, other organizations like ILO, ECD, and of course UNESCO is part. So the interagency group is linked to, for example, global initiative regarding the crisis, like the Global Education Coalition, led by UNESCO, in which we have finalized key elements, key publication or knowledge, like our issue note regarding Tibet in line with the COVID-19 crisis. Next slide, please. So now let me turn to the webinar more specifically after this main picture about the framework of these webinars. As I already mentioned, and certainly you know, the global objective is to share the result of the global survey on the impact of the COVID-19 crisis, more specifically on training and development, and regarding at least employees in the enterprise, but also apprentices and interns. So it's to see how the impact reaches them and how they react to this impact. So this will be, we will have a great discussion with the panel session. So of course, again, my colleague will provide you some information about the survey, but let me recall globally, very globally, the thematic coverage of this survey that looks at 3 main dimensions. The first one is about the impact of the outbreak on the training and development regarding employee, apprentices, and interns, of course, in enterprises, but also in other organizations. The second dimension of the thematic coverage is about good practices and innovative solutions undertaken by these various enterprises among the world. And the third dimension is about, of course, identifying policy recommendations to address such challenges after lifting of lockdown. Next slide, please. So let me allow now to introduce more specifically the webinar in terms of a specific objective. Of course, the specific objectives are in line with what I said just before regarding the coverage. So we aim to share with you the global survey and to facilitate peer learning about the result of this survey. We want also to have more information about what do the country, what are the company experience and good practices. And of course, we want to identify joint policy recommendations that could be used by companies and countries to face the crisis. So the keynote presentation and also the panel discussion will try to address you and to respond to 3 main policy questions. The first one is about impact. We want to know what are the key impacts of the COVID-19 crisis on staff training and development, and how are companies adapting regarding, so for example, some dimensions like social distancing, can be also health and safety requirement, or other elements factor. The second policy dimension of the policy question is about good practices. So we want to know more about key innovative approaches to ensuring equity and quality in skills development in the workplace during this COVID-19 crisis in the future. The third dimension is about recommendation, and we want to identify key recommendations that can be used during the crisis and for the next phases of this crisis. I mean about recovery and building resilience. So the global agenda will go through a panel discussion, as you well understand, and we will have some great speakers. The first one will be Mr. Ashwani Agarwal, who is a senior specialist in skills development system. He's from ILO, and he will deliver in a few minutes his keynote speech. After this session, we will go into the panel session. It will be moderated by our colleague from OECD, Mrs. Glenda Quintini, and she will have the chance to get 6 great speakers from all the world, various regions, lot of countries, 6 countries. So we have speakers from Malaysia, France, Switzerland, South Africa, Brazil, and Turkey. So it's great. Thanks to all for joining this webinar. Then after this session, we will have the Q&A session. It will be moderated by Mrs. Nasrin Mani. Thanks to her also. She is Executive Director of the Global Apprenticeship Network, and she will also moderate this critical Q&A session. And you can raise all your questions again in the chat in Zoom. You can provide your question both at least in English and French, but also in Spanish. We have somebody that can take care of your question. Thanks to address also your name, your country, and if you know to whom you want to address this question, please do it. It will facilitate and be more efficient. Then after this Q&A session, we will move to the last session. That will be the last but not the least. It will be about the closing remark and the way forward. It will be provided by Mr. Norbert Schöbel from the European Commission. So thanks to him also for his involvement in this webinar and more largely in the Alternance group. So again, a warm welcome to all these speakers, all these moderators, and notably to you, all the participants to this Interagency webinar. Without further delay, to give place to speakers and to Q&A session and all the discussion, I will, without delays, give the floor to my colleague from ILO, Ashwani, to provide you with his keynote speech. And thanks to all again.
Thank you, Hervé.
Thank you, Ashwani.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants, depending upon which region of the world are you. Today it's my pleasure to present the preliminary results of the global survey on the impact of COVID-19 on the training of employees, apprentices, and interns. As mentioned by Hervé, this survey has been done jointly by 10 leading development partners. As we all know, the world is going through the biggest crisis since the Second World War. The immediate attention of everyone is on health and economic issues. However, we were getting distress calls from many young persons belonging to different countries, and they were expressing that no learning is taking place, and also specifically for those who are apprentices or interns, in many cases, their wages or stipend were also stopped. They were very distressed and uncertain about their future and not sure when their program will complete, or even if it's complete, if it will ever complete. Will they get the qualification and will get a decent job in the future or not? So question is that, can we afford to lose a complete generation? This basically issue led us, all the agencies together, to carry on this global survey. I will skip the objectives, because Hervé has already mentioned those 3 main objectives of this survey. So I will just come to about how we collected the data. As mentioned by Hervé, now we have received 900 responses from 110 countries, which is quite credible, particularly considering that enterprises are bearing the worst kind of a crisis, and despite those crises, they were able to respond to the questionnaire and participate in the survey. Thanks to all of them who has participated. About 33% of the responses came from the micro, small, and medium enterprises, and about 20% came from large and multinational enterprises. Data was mainly collected during the month of May, and the network of 10 partner organizations and social media was used for getting the responses. What we observed that there is a variations between the number of responses received from various countries, but it is our initial estimate that perhaps there is an in-depth analysis of responses may be possible for about 17 countries. And also there could be a possibility to do a comparison between MSME and large and MNEs also. This is in addition to the global analysis and the report. What we are expecting is that we will be able to complete this detailed analysis and a policy brief by the end of July. So now coming to the preliminary findings of the results. As obvious, the pandemic has seriously disrupted skills development around the world. And what we did after 2 weeks of the survey also, we did an initial analysis of the responses received by that time. So what we observed is that by 11th May, 83% of the enterprises had completely or partially suspended their operations, which by the 3rd June has slightly come down to about 78%. The most significant issue is that the impact on MSMEs was much more than the large and multinational enterprises, as we can see from the 2 indicators. First, you can see from the in terms of suspension of operations, you will see that MSMEs has suffered much more than the large and MNEs. Now, as we all know that one of the mitigation measures which have been taken by the enterprises is to work from home. But here again, in this case also, again, MSMEs were not able to match the large and MNEs in terms of offering work from home facilities for their employees. So in this case, you can see MSMEs have been impacted twice in terms both in suspension of operation and also partially resuming working from the home facilities. Another worrying issue is that 36% of the surveyed enterprises stopped paying wages or stipend to apprentices and interns. This is a significant issue also, and many of the globally or at the country level measures have been taken generally for the welfare of the workers in general, but in many cases apprentices and interns are not covered with those welfare measures. Let's see what are the measures taken by the enterprises to address the impact of pandemic. 36% of surveyed enterprises mentioned that they adjusted the training period for the apprentices and interns. There were some examples also for exemptions to summative assessment or shifting to online examinations so that those who are in the final year of their program, they can complete and get the qualifications. But this is not, again, the challenge comes in particularly for the practical training assessment also. And as far as the employees are concerned, around 60% of enterprises plan new training courses for their employees, and these primarily related to how to work remotely, time management, how to keep their well-being, health and well-being, particularly mental health also. A good feature of all these things is even if this pandemic has caused a lot of crisis, is a paradigm shift to online learning is taking place, which in the long run is going to, I think, create many more innovations in the education and training system to make the learning much more effective and efficient also. However, it is not without the challenges. For example, in many cases, it was found that instructors are not properly trained to deliver online courses. There was difficulty, particularly for the TVET curricula, how to adapt to online formats. As we all know that TVET, many programs requires a lot of practical training also. Then also there was a lack of access to internet and ICT equipment, both for the teachers as well as for the learners to access online learning. And also there was from the capacity of the learners also, because they were not also very used to online platform. So because everything happened abruptly, so many of the challenges were faced. And as far as the apprenticeships is concerned, or online learning, the biggest challenge, as we all know, is how to provide practical or on-the-job training online. I think we need to have better technological solutions to this one. Otherwise, this is going to be a big issue for apprenticeship training. We also asked certain questions to the enterprises. So what are their plans or thinking in terms of beyond the COVID-19 pandemic? So again, another worrying factor is that because of financial constraints, 52% of the surveyed enterprises mentioned they are planning to reduce investments in staff training, which in the long run will be very, very detrimental to skill pipeline for those enterprises and ultimately affect their productivity and competitiveness. But then there are some good features also. They also mentioned that 75% of them mentioned that they will make adjustments to training after the pandemic, and particularly they will increase investments in distance learning, which is a good feature. They will introduce or intensify blended learning methodologies, and they will also build the capacity of their staff to deliver distance and online learning and provide relevant equipment and facilities to them. So there is always plus, but there is also, of course, there is negative, but there is also plus also of this pandemic to the education training systems. So finally, I will say in conclusion, the offer of new apprenticeships and internships as well as staff training is likely to be lower even after the lifting of lockdown measures. The digital divide could increase the exclusion of disadvantaged groups, and which is happening already. So what is also required is the use of multimodal channels comprising high-tech, low-tech, or no-tech solutions that needs to be promoted. And we received some examples from the countries that how they are going to use a different media, not only based on the internet-based model. They are going to use podcasts, they are going to use radio, they are going to use the TV, and some other methods also, so that no one is left behind. Thank you very much for your patience listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwani. And now we will give, without further delays, because the time is running, I will give the floor to Mrs. Glenda Quintini again from OECD. Thanks, Glenda.
Thanks, Hervé, for the introduction, and thanks for the panelists, excellent panelists we have today. I'll introduce them briefly. So we have Mr. Azwan Alif Abdul Rahman, who is CEO of CMC Engineering Group in Malaysia. Ms. Morgane Daboval, who's a development manager at the French National Apprenticeship Association, the ANAF, which is an association that represents apprentices in France. She also represents the ANAF at the European Apprenticeship Network. Then we have Ms. Cynthia Hansen, who is head of the Addecco Group Foundation. Ms. Luisa Numalo, who is provincial educator in the province of Limpopo for the Congress of South African Trade Unions. Giovanna Panaghi, who is Executive Manager of Education at the Sistema FIEP of the Paraná State Federation of Industries, a part of SENAI in Brazil. And Ms. Burju Yildirim, who is HR Manager of Sabancı Holding and is also a member of a TÜSİAD business organization in Turkey. Let me just remind everybody to try and be brief in your answers, so there's time to perhaps come back to some of the points, have maybe a second round of a quick second round of questions, and leave enough time for the question and answers afterwards. I think I'd like to start with Burcu Yildirim and ask her about the experience in her company in terms of reorganizing training in the context of COVID. So what changes did you have to make? And do you feel that these changes will stay, or are you reverting to the pre-COVID training processes, systems, and content?
Thank you, Glenda. Yes, of course, our education systems, our training efforts are changed about the effects of the COVID-19. I'd like to explain some examples from our experience with Sabancı Holding today. In terms of soft skills development, we found out that the COVID-19 process put some of the skills forward among the skill sets. And I'll give 4 examples of that. The first one is crisis management and leadership. To cope with the uncertainty of the crisis situation, we found out that the trust among the teams are quite crucial, and it will go on that way, we believe. Also, the second one is resilience. Resilience of the individuals affects resilience of the organization. The third one is creativity and innovation. Even before COVID-19 process, in order to survive in the new economy of fourth industrial revolution, we knew that we need creative, innovative individuals with multidisciplinary thinking skills. And the fourth one is collaboration, increasing the awareness of the employees about the balance between the controls of the organization and those of the ecosystem is quite crucial in our soft skill set, let's say. So what we did do, which actions did we take in Sabancı Holding? First of all, we revised our talent development program. We thought about which sessions can be held on digital platforms. We were not 100% prepared for this kind of crisis, of course. So our training companies that we work with, we need to work with them and give them time to adapt to the new normal. So we added some additional courses in the programs. Let's say Harvard University Disruptive Innovation online courses. We prepared a module depending on that. And also management of remote working teams, virtual facilitation, and effective remote working courses were added into the program. We organized virtual workshops about crisis management, resilience, and stakeholder management during crisis. And also we organized webinars and Q&As with the participation of the top management team and the subject matter experts on the topic. If I need to give examples, let's say economic effects of the pandemic, leadership during pandemic, and post-pandemic way of working are some of them. In the technical side, in terms of technical capabilities, our aim is adapting our organization to the new normal and the new way of working to reach the pace of the changing business needs, let's say. And we define 2 topics. One is agile management, the second one is digitalization. So as far as agile management is concerned, many leaders are now reflecting on how small, nimble teams deal in a hurry to deal with the COVID-19 emergency, made important decisions faster and better. So it made it clear that we need to redesign our organizations with a new operational model based on higher flexibility and more agile and remote ways of working. So in Sabancı Holding, we created agile teams by the sponsorship of our top management. We trained them about the agile management. We assigned them agile coaches, and now they are currently working on the strategic project of our group in agile, using agile methodology. And the second one is digitalization. It was already a main issue, main strategic focus for us, but it became a matter of business continuity during pandemic, as far as we live. So it's obvious that we need more human resources creating value from the digital opportunities like big data. So we already had advanced data analytics program, which was launched last year. We didn't stop it. We rapidly converted it on digital platforms. So we didn't want to stop it because it's a strategic issue for us. So it was an immediate action for us to reschedule this year's program on the digital platform as much as possible. of course, there are some issues like hackathon at the end of the program that we couldn't do it on the digital platform. So we'll wait for the pandemic for that. So last point, we also added lean methodology in our development programs for our employees to effectively digitalize their processes that they are responsible for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Burcu. Very interesting points. I'd like now to move to Azwan Alif Abdul Rahman. The experience of Burcu is obviously the experience of a multi-holding company, a very big enterprise, while in Malaysia you are CEO of say a medium-sized enterprise in the infrastructure sector. So how does your experience differ from the experience of Burcu, or how is it is similar? What did you have to change in the way you trained and worked because of COVID?
Thank you very much, Glinda. So the perspective that I am going to bring onto the table is basically, number one, is as a small/medium enterprise business that is operating in quite a niche industry, specifically, for example, in railway industry. So how we are adapting into this situation, because COVID-19 specifically has got three biggest impact. Number one is actually unexpected for everyone. And number two, the fact that it results in severe measure by policymakers, where certain governments, I guess all governments around the world, are implementing lockdowns in order to flatten the curve. And of course, number three is as a company that relies on infrastructure projects, where the government spending or the public spending are key. In our case, we can see that there is definitely a swift change in the government policy, as well as government spending from infrastructure project towards a more critical industry like healthcare or digitalization. So in our case, first thing first, what we have to do is actually to understand our manpower, review it, group the current staff force according to their skill set. Especially, we need to understand our current contractual obligation with the customer, whether the suspension of the projects due to the inevitable lockdown may result in us being deemed as defaulting in our contractual obligations. So from here itself, there are several angles that we need to look into. Number one is legal, as well as the technical skill set. The problem with small and medium enterprise that I can foresee is, as per the survey, which is quite consistent, where the preliminary results are reflecting the fact that we don't have probably enough financial resources or existing digital resources. So we rely a lot on what we currently have. So when all of the staff are working from home, we need to be able to adapt quickly to all available technologies. If we don't have Zoom or we don't have not enough stable internet connection at home, we have to make use of WhatsApp call, we have to make use of normal calls or even traditional phones. So these are the ones that we need to make sure that we are able to tap into. And for certain work that cannot stop because of safety issue, like at construction sites, we need to make sure that even the lower level supervisors at sites are able to adapt to probably become a manager in one day, overnight, to be able to supervise their workers at the construction site about the new health requirement, the new safety requirement that is required by the law, and of course, for the company to make sure that we are not exposed too much of a risk from this COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you very much. I'd like now to ask Cynthia, perhaps, to give us, Cynthia Hansen from the Addecco Foundation, to give us a broader perspective. Of course, you serve a large number of customers. What are the clients? What are they asking you? What is the focus of the training they're asking for? What's their perspective? So what's your experience of the changes they've had to implement?
Sure. So I'd like to actually frame this in three different pieces. One is the fact that it's very early days and what we know so far. The second one is what we're seeing so far in terms of the way skilling is changing. And then third, which is really important, back to some of the earlier comments, is who pays for it. So first, as I mentioned, it is really early days. So we've done some looking at what are we seeing across our own organizations? What are we starting to hear from clients? What are we seeing in the research that's being done in terms of government responses as well? And ultimately, this is pointing to the fact that right now, companies don't yet know necessarily what they need. And so we are seeing that the needs for reskilling are being driven by certain factors. So there was a piece that just came out of our US operations where they actually identified 5 main factors within companies that are driving the need for skilling and reskilling. The first one being workforce reduction in many cases, and this may be permanent reduction or it may be short-term with things like Kurzarbeit. Second is increased demand, and we are seeing that in some industries there is increased demand. If you look at something like healthcare, it's not the dire picture that you're seeing across the board. Some areas are actually growing. Also, fourth is disrupted operations. So what you might find is that it's not that you're having to permanently scale down your operations, but you might have disrupted operations, and therefore you might need to move people from one part of the company to another, one part of an operation to another, which then, of course, requires different kinds of skills. And then fifth is pivoted production. So you've got a number of examples of companies that were making, say, textiles, clothing, and then pivoted in order to make the personal protection equipment that's needed, or masks and such. So again, that's going to require different kinds of tooling, and then therefore different kinds of skills among the people that they've got working for them. But ultimately, what we're finding right now is that companies don't have enough information. They don't know exactly what they need. And the best thing that we can do is help them to unpack what it is they're trying to achieve. Therefore, what are the jobs that they're going to need to keep? Therefore, what are the kinds of skills that are needed? Do they have them? Do they need to build them? Are there people who can be trained, retrained within the company? And then more broadly in the global workforce, what are the kinds of skilling, reskilling demands that are going to come? In the second bucket then, in terms of what we're seeing in skilling, to echo what some of my colleagues have said, it's very much around looking at what can be done virtually. If you're in situations of lockdown, then you need to look at what can be offered, either retooling the kinds of skilling and reskilling offerings that you have, or looking for others. So what we're seeing already within our own company is things like General Assembly, which is our main training arm. They had operated originally on a model that was very much a hybrid, that a lot of their unique selling point was that you spend part of the time in the classroom, part of the time online, and you get this lovely mix, that blended learning approach. They now have had to pivot much more toward putting more of their content online, making a lot of what they were doing in the classroom actually online. And they've now seen an increase in the people who are signing up for their long courses and also for the short courses that they're making available. They also, as part of kind of their corporate citizenship, also made a lot of their content free online, knowing that there would be a lot of people who would suddenly be out of work or would be furloughed and would be looking for ways to keep themselves employed, employable, ready to go back to work, ready to be part of that restart. We're also seeing similar things across our Spanish operations as well. They actually quickly, under their umbrella of skilling and reskilling, started to look at reskilling. So they actually started to offer a very short 3-day course on healthcare, where you could take people who had maybe been in service industry, and they could go through a 3-day course and then redeployed as, essentially, they were calling them COVID angels, people who would then within the company help people to flatten the curve, to deal with the new ways of working, to help with the health and safety restrictions as well. So again, looking at how you pivot the things that you might already have. And then also in the US, we've got several other providers or sections within the company that are looking at how do you provide the right kinds of skilling, reskilling, specifically for blue collar workers. A lot of the rhetoric that you hear has focused very much on what are the digital skills that you need in order for people to work remotely, but there are many, many people across the world who are not able to work remotely, who need to look at basic skills, and to become more employable or to stay employed. And so we've opened up trainings through the Addecco Academy in partnership with Penn Foster, which is an online community college network, to offer very, very basic skills. And we now have over 3,000 people enrolled in that. We also have something called Skill Builder that offers another 3,000 courses purely online, again, to people primarily working in low-skilled jobs. And what we've seen overall is a huge interest in IT skills, but very basic IT skills, using a computer at a basic level, basic computing, using Office, things like Word and Excel. And so it's a really good reminder that we need to be offering things at all different levels. And then lastly, there's the issue of who pays for this. And of course, this has been very much on the agenda of this group, because it ultimately should be a combination of government provision, employer provision, and increasingly individuals as well, being more in the driver's seat, deciding how they want to spend their time and their capital of all sorts to keep themselves employable and to build their careers. So we're very much proponents of the idea of individual learning accounts, things that are going to unlock money, but give people more individual say in how that gets spent. And then also pairing that with good information about where are these trends going. If I want to be employable, what kinds of skills would I need to enhance and where would I go to get them? So we want to make sure that the issue of financing doesn't fall off the radar. So we're really looking at this holistically in terms of where do people need to build, where do they need to go in order to meet the labor market demands of the future.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. I'd like now to move to the issue of apprenticeships. As Ashwani has mentioned in his presentation, we found in the survey, and we have seen throughout COVID, a lot of concern for those who were in apprenticeships before COVID, who got interrupted. How could we continue? What kind of support they received? So I want to give the floor to Morgane Daboval to hear what has happened in France, give us an idea of how apprenticeships could be continued, what were the concerns there and the constraints, to understand again how this can be done better. Oh, it looks like Morgane's screen has frozen. Perhaps I'll give the floor to Giovanna Pugnaghi first then. I mean, it's another example from Brazil, but again, on a similar topic. Giovanna, as I said, works for the state of Paraná, for the industry in Paraná, and they run training centers as part of Senai, and she can tell us perhaps about how you managed to continue the training that was ongoing, how you managed to reorganize, and what you had to do to be able to make sure that the training could go on during the pandemic.
Thank you, Glenda. The impacts we had here were that several companies had to suspend their operations or part of their operations, and we had to find strategies to adapt our hands-on training because our students would have to continue to study from home. And second was that students with low connectivity as well, or with low level of digital literacy. We know it's difficult to maintain equity when you talk about access to technology and to the internet. So the solutions we found here for these challenges were, first, use blended learning training methodology, just like Cynthia said in her speech, in all of our courses. So plan what would be taught totally online and teach the online content first and move the practice in our labs to the end of the training so that we would have time available to plan the gradual return of our students with fewer students in the lab once the pandemic is over. The second solution we found was to use simulators. The National Senai headquarters mapped the simulators available, talked to partners such as Festo and Siemens to make simulators available for free to our students. And we worked on the planning with the teachers. So simulators just as electro-hydraulic circuits, car mechanics simulator, robotics automation, for example. The third solution was to transmit the lessons live with the teacher using the equipment and materials in the lab available and send these materials for the students to practice at home. before the lesson or during the lesson. And for the fourth solution for the low connectivity was that we mapped students who had access to the internet, the students who didn't, and the ones that had overload on the system or the connection failed or problems with providers. Then we instructed our schools on how to apply the strategies. The best one has one also talked about this strategy was the use of WhatsApp. In Brazil, according to the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, almost 80% of the population have a smartphone nowadays. So we use WhatsApp communications. Teachers would communicate, send videos with instructions on how to do the activities, how to use our online platform, and especially motivate students with positive messages. And they would also leave activities ready to be picked up at our schools or to be sent to the company where the employees work with the instructions needed. So close communication between teachers and students was fundamental for that. For this topic, then my recommendations are, in order to find alternatives for the hands-on training and low connectivity, teacher training is the key. We had to train our teachers so that they would be able to use digital tools, both to use digital tools and also to work with the most efficient teaching techniques in order to keep students learning and to keep them motivated to learn. So we prepared an online platform specifically for our teachers with webinars, instructions, Q&A, how to use the camera, how to use the platforms we provided them with, which were from Microsoft and Google, and especially how to keep students motivated by using interaction techniques. And the second recommendation I would like to make is for companies that are having difficulties in delivering courses or delivering the needs they want, to find an institution as a partner to provide both the structure, the online platform for that, and trained teachers to use the best strategies in order to keep students learning, to keep them motivated, and especially to help the companies to achieve their goals in terms of training for the employees.
Thank you very much, Giovanna. We can now go back to Morgane. I think we lost you for a moment there. So we wanted to, I was saying that we wanted to hear about apprenticeships in France. So how apprenticeship training was disrupted, what were the key constraints, or if it was continued, what were the factors that allowed it to continue?
Yeah, thank you very much. And sorry, I had a problem with connection. Yeah, so about that point that about education and training at home, that was a big issue, and I would like to come back on that point specifically. This issue is pretty much linked to qualitative training question and digital accessibility for apprentices and for youth in general. Mr. Agarwal, you talked a bit about that in the introduction, and it was quite interesting. The COVID-19 crisis has really highlighted the question of accessibility to numerical system and digital system. So as I represent here the European Apprentices Network, I will talk at this scale, but of course the analysis is linked to a global reflection. So of course the adaptation of training centers was, and this is more an empirical information, but it was quite good, and the companies as well adapted themselves really efficiently during the crisis. But for information, 21% of apprentices have a computer, and 58% have a place to work at home for 2 hours a day, a quiet place. So one of the main topics is really how to answer the digital accessibility issue for apprentices, and how to take in account in every country the importance of providing numerical equipment and numerical training for all apprentices. We think that digital accessibility, and that means knowledge, should be included in every apprenticeship training program, and for every activity sectors. This is really important. So one of that point I would just like to share about, like, the announcement that French government made 1 week ago about, and I will maybe come back in the second one after that, but every apprentice will get a grant from now to buy a digital equipment, and numerical education will be included in apprenticeship training programs for all sectors. So this is a point really important to answer this issue, and so but this question is still linked to all the actors of the ecosystem of apprenticeship: government, territories, authorities, companies, training centers, and everyone has to work about that point. And I will finish this first intervention like another point due to the digitalization and the crisis is maybe the value of the diplomas for this generation of apprentices. Mr. Agarwal told in introduction about the fact that apprenticeship is about practicing as well, and so maybe there will be a lack of practice for this generation, and maybe the companies should adapt the training politics for the new apprentices, the new graduated and the new apprentices coming in their companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Morgane. I think both Morgane, but also Giovanna as one we've heard, and others we've heard the issue of digital literacy. We've heard a lot about the issue of digital infrastructure as well, so access to computer connectivity and so on. So I'm going to give the floor now to Luisa Numalu to ask her to what extent this was an issue in South Africa, in your region in particular, and more generally, and how COSATU, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, has contributed or is working with employers to soften the consequences of COVID on training and workers.
Thank you, Christine. I would like to respond by bringing the role that has been played not only by COSATU but labor constituency through the National Skills Authority. So what has happened as part of the interventions, the National Skills Authority in liaison has been liaising and engaging with the Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Technology on proposed short-term and long-term measures in an attempt to mitigate the adverse effect of the pandemic in our country in relation to South African skills development landscape. And Labour has also supported the National Skills Authority's submission to the Ministry that stipends or wages in respect to learnership, internship, and work-integrated learning and work-based learning programs should continue to be paid during lockdown to minimize the effects of disruption on learners during this lockdown. And the ministry issued a directive to all sector education and training authorities, which are SETAs, to continue with the payment of stipends during the national lockdown. Now I will quickly look at the challenges in relation to limited connectivity and its effects in some areas. While mobile operators have done well to extend coverage to most of the population, these services are not affordable to all learners. So the lack of access, whether it be economical or logistical reasons, has excluded other students from training courses. This is a significant issue in the rural areas and lower socioeconomic areas, which is further exacerbated by poor connectivity in those remote areas. Like there are areas where you can access network, and there are those areas where there is still a challenge. So in terms of short-term solutions in ensuring that training continues, what has happened in our country is that some sectors and educational institutions have taken a proactive approach such as providing drive-through Wi-Fi hotspots for learners to download their work, their schoolwork. And other sectors are utilizing low technology approaches, such as local radio stations and dedicated some specific television stations to broadcast lectures and educational sessions, so to increase access to vulnerable groups. However, the issue of connectivity remains a challenge in some areas, especially those rural areas as indicated. So working along with employers in our country, I think it's important to mention that in terms of the Skills Development Act of 1998, as amended in 2008 in our country, each SETA is required to develop a sector skills plan to identify skills priorities within each sector. And those plans provide an overview of the skills gap in each sector and outlines the interventions aimed at addressing these shortages. So the collaboration between SETAs, the training providers, the labor service organizations will remain key in order to respond to new skills development opportunities that are emerging in the East Cape, given the ramp up of e-collaboration and increase in distant working activity. So some of the interventions that have been considered or that have been effected is that the NSA took a decision that there should be a strong focus on structural changes to the skills development system in order to accommodate and capacitate learners and workers for the fourth industrial revolution. So these changes should include the provision of technological devices as part of learning tools of trade, and we need also to identify the existing technology to support the shift towards online distance learning, and also identify cost-effective of user-friendly technologies. So basically, what has been happening is that there are proposals in place. NSA is continuing to liaise with the Ministry of Higher Education, and in doing that, there are a number of proposals that have been presented, and one of those proposals is that electronic learning materials that will include audio function are needed to ensure participation of blind learners and sign language interpreters to ensure participation of deaf learners as well, so that they are not discriminated during this period of lockdown. So these are some of the interventions and the work that we are currently doing, working with employers through the National Skills Authority.
Thank you very much, Louisa, and thanks to everybody else for this first round. There's a few points that I'd like to go back to. I mean, several of you have mentioned looking ahead, looking at how this crisis may have accelerated existing processes. Well, of course, it will have caused a structural change by the time it's over, some sectors declining, others emerging. We don't know yet whether those experiences, temporary difficulties, will be able to spring back. So I was interested in following up a little bit on how could we assess or put up in place a system to assess these change in skill needs. I think Louisa mentioned the collaboration with the SETAs in South Africa and how they are looking at these emerging needs. I wanted to ask Giovanna as well, because Senai is well known for looking at changes in skill needs, and so what is happening over there?
Well, here in Brazil, we received demands from the companies about 3 different needs. First, companies looked for us to train their staff on skills such as remote working and time management, for example, as lots of employees started working from home or were not able to work from home as what they did in the companies. They were not able to do at home. So remote working and time management are some of the new needs that appeared. Second, courses related to soft skills. How to work in teams, develop creativity, working with sustainability, how to make better decisions. And the third new need we found out, we've been asked for, was training related to health and safety to prevent from COVID-19, as companies had to start preparing employees to return gradually to work. Now, in order to assist these companies faster and to help them qualify the employees in terms of these three new needs that emerged, National Senai developed a marketplace, an online marketplace in which companies can choose the courses they would like or they would like to do with their employees, or even tell us what their needs are so that we can deliver everything online. So this was a solution we found here for these new needs that emerged. And we already know that some companies have also started looking for us for online courses related to introductions on Industry 4.0, such as introduction to big data, artificial intelligence, and also IoT.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see that we're getting a very consistent picture here. I could see Bourjou also, nodding when you were talking about the new skills requests that you're getting from your from employers. Another aspect that we haven't really discussed is the support that you may or not have received from government. So the various actions that several countries have put in place to support companies in continuing training. So I'd like to hear from perhaps Bourjou and Azwan, what were the forms of support that were most helpful, and which ones you would have liked to have that weren't there?
Maybe I can start. By the government support, actually, in terms of trainings or staff development and staff training, this was not the focus till now, because the focus was the economic support for the employees. So I believe in time there will be some other legislation change about this issue, because of course many of the companies need that support, many of the employees need that support. But for now, I can say that it's limited with the economic effects of the COVID-19. But we would like to have some additional legislations about the future of work, for example, flexibility about the working conditions changes. Different flexible working conditions should be quickly adapted legislations we need. And also we need that the trainings about the digitalization and the Industry 4.0 should be more emphasized on the elementary and high school level, so that when we hire an employee, we can put additional training, of course, but with a base, it would be perfect for the future, for building our future. These are the two topics that came to my mind in terms of government support.
Yeah, I think if I may add very quickly, for example, in Malaysia case, the government has actually also announced, similar to other countries, an economic stimulus package. What would be relevant is if, for instance, not necessarily directly into education institution that provides vocational or TVET training, because everyone is supposed to be at home. So what they are doing potentially at the very beginning of the lockdown is to ensure, especially all the general workers who are probably unskilled or semi-skilled, continue to be employed by their current employers. So wage scheme, employee retention program, or wage subsidy were very helpful in order to ensure employment had continued. But for the employer perspective, we had always to be ensured that the savings that we receive by virtue of subsidy that the government received are not necessarily meant to be spent somewhere else, but actually for retraining and reskilling purposes. So this is also either to invest in infrastructure to upgrade the technology or IT requirements to adopt to the new normal or new method of working. At the same time, the requirement of retraining. What I would have hoped that we receive more support, it would probably for number one, instead of direct cash or direct injection into the economy where employers can continue their businesses, we also would appreciate things that are in lieu of cash. For instance, tax rebates. Tax rebates for, you know, the more training that you do, the more reskilling or the more general workers that you ensure you employ, there would be some non-cash incentives such as taxes and whatnot. In addition to that, obviously is the facilitation, as we agree that we don't want to have a short-term discovery or short-term solution. We want to make sure that if a reskilling is required, there should be some sustainable investment in that particular industry, even like healthcare, not necessarily into buying protective personal equipment, but it could also be more investment into making sure healthcare are more digitalized. You know, in the future, the hospital are more automized, adopting more digital platform. So these are the kind of moving forward, the blueprints for specific sectors that are emerging during this COVID need to be continued. Otherwise, companies will be hard to adopt back or revert back to their previous business. It will be too swift.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for an extremely interesting discussion. We have to stop here because we're already a few minutes over time. I'd like to give the floor to Nazreen Mani now to manage the question and answers with the audience. The floor is yours, Nazreen.
Thank you, Glenda, and good afternoon to everyone. I think this has been really insightful discussion and good practice shared from all of our panelists. So thank you for that, and some interesting but tough questions coming through. So I think I will try and allocate some questions across the panelists. Some you may all have an opinion on. I think perhaps let's start with a question around assessments of evaluation. I think that's been a big challenge. Many countries are going into the conclusion of the academic year, particularly across Europe. What does that mean for students who need to be evaluated? How do they complete their studies, many of them? So if I could, Giovanna and perhaps Morgane, if you would like to just give an idea of some of the solutions in place that you've seen, and if any of the other panelists want to add, feel free to do so. So Giovanna, if we can start with you.
Yes, thank you. Assessment was a big issue for us as well. We had to adapt all of the assessments we had planned for this year. And when we talk about assessment, it doesn't mean only assessment on paper, that you have to answer questions and put your analysis on your own on the paper. So we found out some possible different types of assessment that were able to be used online. Moodle, which is an open source, has an interesting type of assessment you can use by using the camera with the student. We also adapted some written tests for the interaction between the teacher and the student, so that teacher would ask questions to the student, and then the student answer these questions. And we've been also using simulators to help us assess some practical skills. So these are the measures we took here in order to continue for the assessment to continue in our courses.
Thank you, Giovanna. Morgane, any input from you?
Yeah, so mostly here in Europe, every student or apprentice could graduate or present the exams. Of course, numerical exams. All the practical assessments were cancelled, which is actually a problem, and specifically in the artisanal sector and agricultural sector. But almost every government accepted the fact that we could graduate without having the normal exams, and we are not late in the formation, and every student can follow up and can keep going on.
Great, thank you. Morgane, I had one question directed specifically at you, and that was Richard asking if, just to clarify, if in your first presentation, if you had mentioned that the French government had subsidized the cost of equipment, because I think that is also an important issue in the evaluation and learning aspect, that people have access to equipment, and he just wanted to clarify, because I imagine lots of people are going to take that as best practice if it is the case.
Yeah, the information is good. In France, every apprentice has a grant when he or she begins, and the first equipment is included in that grant. It's 500 euros per person, and computer and digital equipment wasn't included in that grant. It wasn't eligible, as we say. So from now and from last week, every new apprentice will get that grant and can buy a computer and ask to the government to take the money back, basically.
Fantastic.
So yeah, this is an interesting answer. Yeah.
Thank you. There was a question around some of the alternative solutions, especially where the digital divide exists. And we know, Sipiwe, you made a very important point that not everyone has access to equipment, access to the internet is not universal, data is expensive. And I think the question was, what are the other options? But through the conversation, I think you've all offered solutions. The discussion around WhatsApp, Hazwan, you mentioned that. Giovanna, you mentioned the use of WhatsApp extensively. Cynthia, you've offered some alternative solutions, and Sipiwe, you've referenced using TV and community radio. So I think we've answered that through the conversation. The issue of teachers and trainers is an important one. And Cynthia, if I could come to you, given the range of involvement that Addecco has across the sector, how do we develop instructors and learners to straddle these the shift in pedagogy? So moving to now a hybrid approach, possibly when everything reopens. But there's also a question that said, well, what happens if COVID persists and we can't get back to what we intended? So do we just continue virtually? What are the impact on learning, especially where you have to have practical delivery? What is your take on that, Cynthia?
Sure. I would say one of the cornerstones is to make sure that as much as possible, your trainers and your teachers are also practitioners. So this is the advantage with what we've seen certainly with GA, but also with the Addecco Academy, is that if you have people who are practitioners, then they can impart that practical side to it or give practical kinds of exercises that students can do on their own. I loved, Giovanna, I think it was you who were saying about sending materials to students so that they could actually do practice at home. I think that's brilliant. So I think what we're trying to do now is two things. One is to create digital mirrors of some of the in-person trainings that we do, but also create more hybrid models that are specifically designed to marry the academic study with the practical application.
Thank you. Vasu, if I can come to you, and you've spoken a lot about some of the solutions and the shifts, but are you seeing that we're strengthening relationships with TVET institutions? Do you see that the private sector is drawing closer to both institutions delivering vocational education, the providers, as well as the policy makers? What is your sense on what is happening and what can happen post-COVID?
And you were addressing me, right, as far as I understood?
Yes, I'm asking you.
Okay, sorry. Yes, actually we are working on the scenarios right now, best case, worst case, and etc. A lot of scenarios. So, of course, the post-pandemic, we are waiting for different ways of working arise. The new normal, the new way of working, the new environment, and will we still have offices, or will we go on working, distance learning will continue? So it depends on the case. So we are preparing, but also as far as I said before, the government should support us with the relative legislation and the flexibility and different types of working models and quite flexible adaptability in the case of there will be a new normal and won't go back to the old normal. So that's the main issue. So we need to collaborate. Like the collaboration is the main, one of the main skills in the business world we see. We will be social enterprises. We are trying to be social enterprises. So there should be a quite collaboration between the government, the private sector, and the institutions, etc. So to build the new normal and quite adaptability.
Thank you. Haswan, I think you gave a good perspective on some of the challenges that small and medium companies face, and I think what we'd like to understand as well is what happens where there's this potential shift to fully virtual. How do companies manage this, and how do the systems adapt to make sure that we don't impact on quality, that we don't have perhaps these constructed learning environments that are fully simulated, but people don't even know how to use the equipment when they come face to face with it. I think those are some of the concerns coming through. What is your sense going forward, how we adapt to the possibility of apprenticeship training moving fully online?
Yeah, well, I think you have asked an absolutely relevant point, which is actually very relevant to my company, particularly today. In my company, even right now, I have observed that everyone is actually undergoing a completely new vocational training, even with the staff or the employees with the highest qualification, even masters or PhD. They are all literally being refreshed at level 0, whereby we are all adopting to a new norm. So in this case, even for a company, we actually need to identify the skill set as required. So digitalization is very important at this stage. What we had to do is, number one, with the projects that we are currently delivering, especially for the ones that are definitely going to be impacted even more, our international projects. For example, we are delivering projects in Vietnam, as well as in Algeria, whereby there are certain works that was supposed to be done during this period, but because of the border control, because of the border closure, our staff cannot travel there. So immediately what needed to be done, apart from internal training, is to transparently and honestly communicate with the client side. What are the alternatives for us to continue the project without further delay? What are the common goals that we need to achieve in order to make sure that both parties can train together? What are the available platforms? What are the available digital avenues that we can adopt? So all these actually are giving some sort of preempt or hints should we are forced to, move forward in a more virtual world. There are certain scheme or certain activities, obviously, that cannot be completely replaced by virtual activities, but definitely we need to move towards looking at possibility of more emphasis on virtual implementation of certain construction projects. So business continuity planning is very, very important in this case. So I would encourage, even for us to think about individual skills, we also need to ensure that the management team of the company, the HR department of the company, and the training department of the company are well aware that we need to review back all the standard operating procedures, SOP, to make sure that we are ready for, we hope there won't be another one, but in case there will be another unexpected similar situation.
And that's such an important point you're making, Haswan, because companies don't do skilling outside of the business. Everything that we do around training is integrated into delivery and the bottom line. So it's so important that we have a holistic approach and a full organizational commitment to this process. And I think another issue that's going to come up is the issue of supply chains. And as supply chains shorten, how do we skill up people in country? So I think the ongoing response is going to be quite long term, with many areas to be considered. Sipiwe, let me come to you, and I'm going to say Sipiwe because I'm a fellow South African, so I'll use your first name. And I think there was a very interesting question. Someone from South Africa, in fact, highlighted the number of solutions that you spoke about. And the question was, how do we scale this? You know, what are the ideas that you have locally, but what are some of the ideas that our listeners, our participants, and those on the panel can take back in terms of the solutions that work? And we are seeing traction, especially the alternate to pure digital skilling. How do we take those forward?
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. I've also, and for the question raised by the participant. Like I indicated earlier on, that this is possible. It can be scaled nationally through the institutions that we're working very closely with as labor. For an example, currently, we, in our discussions through NSA, we have assigned the skills providers as well as labor service organizations to look at modalities and other avenues that we can employ in ensuring that we will reach a sizable number of learners in our country. And we are also looking at the possibilities of exploring new skills by industries as well as employers post-COVID-19 in terms of what will be needed to get people back into track, to get people back into learning and into employment. And we have also acknowledged the importance of that information and technology is one of the key sector and generator of jobs, and may be considered as the backbone of the digital economy across all sectors. So as we are working with the SETAs, it will be important moving forward in ensuring that all sector authorities are beginning to come up with modalities in ensuring that this issue is addressed.
Thank you so much, Sipiwe. Cynthia, there's an interesting question directed at you around individual training accounts. And it links to what Hervé said in his opening address, the need for career guidance and orientation to emerging skills and trends in different sectors. But particularly, how do we ensure that lower skilled workers are able to access these accounts, the funding that's being made available, to ensure that they can orientate themselves to labor market demand and skills in demand?
Yeah, so the individual learning accounts are generally driven at the government level, and I think where the importance of employers comes in, sorry about that, is to provide that kind of guidance that you're talking about. And so I think it's a combination of the right information, but then also incorporating that guidance into other touch points that you have. So for example, if it is someone who is looking for low-skilled temporary work, and the touch point might be coming into a branch or being part of an apprenticeship system, then you actually incorporate into that conversations with whoever the referent is about what would you like your longer term trajectory to look like, and how do we use this experience and the opportunity to train you and to combine that with your practical work experience to help move you toward that that goal. So an example is one of our subsidiaries, Pontoon, actually runs a program specifically for what are essentially apprentices in the UK, mainly in the banking sector. And they looked at, they already have several touch points, but it was very, very transactional. Come in, give us your documents, show us your passport, get your packet, go off to work. And instead what they did, they felt that that was a missed opportunity, particularly in times like this. So they incorporated into each of those touch points a longer conversation about, this is your first work experience. Where do you see yourself going? What kinds of experiences feed you, feed your soul, make you happy, make you fulfilled? Therefore, how can we make sure that you get those experiences through this apprenticeship? And then what would be the next step in terms of what you need for training to move into something beyond apprenticeship? So even just something like that, of adding that accompaniment kind of element, can be extremely helpful for the employer in terms of retaining somebody, and certainly for the individual.
Good. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Glenda, do we have time for one more question to be directed to Ashwani?
Yes, Nasreen, I wanted to intervene. I have a bad role as timekeeper, so we are beyond the time. So last question, please, and it's very interesting, but we have to limit.
Thank you,
Thanks.
And that's why I thought I'd do a time check, because we could be here for the whole day. But Ashwani, there's a question from Josh in New Zealand, and I think, you know, a lot of the discussion when we speak about apprentices, we focus on young people. And Josh's question is really about people who have been employed and are now out of employment. And, you know, did we assess learner preference for retraining potentially in the questionnaire? And, you know, does the rapid rise of digital skilling, do we see it becoming a first choice for adult learners, especially people who need to find their second, third, or even fourth career opportunity as a result of COVID directly, but also the other skilling impacts of the future of work that we have been discussing over the years?
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. William, there's no straight answer for this one, but what we are observing, increased use of online learning for reskilling and upskilling is taking place. For example, I'll give an example. Now, ILO has announced a MOOC program on the apprenticeship, and you will be surprised, within 3 weeks' time, we have received already more than 1,000 persons from all over the world have registered to that one. Normally, if the lockdown was not there, when we conduct this kind of program face to face, we get maximum about say 50 to maximum 100 persons in one course. And out of these 1,000 persons, you can see it's a multiplier. 10 times or 20 times more persons are joining the program, and many of them are adult learners. So who could have got this opportunity to upgrade their skills by going to a face-to-face learning program? So there is a growing interest. But at the same time, as this panel discussed, and I also mentioned in my presentation, I think there is many more challenges are also there. But there is a methods where which these challenges can be overcome through capacity building, and also providing the bandwidth, lower cost of bandwidth and equipment. There are many things which we have come in the discussion also. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwani, and over to you, Glenda. Thank you.
I think it's over to Norbert, so I'll give the floor to Hervé, who's introducing.
No, thanks to all. It was great, and Norbert Schobel, Mr. Norbert Schobel has the floor for the closing remarks. Sorry for going over the time, but it's so interesting that it's difficult to cut. So thanks, Norbert, for your closing remarks as synthesis you can. And thanks a lot.
Thank you, Hervé, and I feel very privileged to draw some conclusions of this extremely interesting webinar. I think there are many activities, as I can see, but this time I think it's the first and only global survey, thanks to Ashwani, that we had the opportunity to discuss the results. If I can see my first slide, and here it is, it summarizes a little bit what the discussions were. And I think we have to say that the alarm bells are ringing. In many countries, we have serious problems, and some of the aspects have just been raised when we talk about the continuity of work-based learning and apprenticeships, for instance, as in the questions we heard about the problem of examination and how can we ensure that the quality continues. So that is, of course, something really serious, and we need to ensure that with the reforms and the investment, we can make this continuity happen. The second element was the digital technology, and I learned also from Ashwani some positive elements here, because 60% said that there is a shift to these remote learning solutions, which is of course very positive. Then of course we need more guidance in these serious times. And I heard also from Senai from Brazil that the close cooperation between the schools and the companies is a key element. Particularly if we think about the digital skills and the cooperation between the teachers and trainers. Now, again, for the apprentice, of course, what counts is also the social protection, the salaries. In the survey we heard it's quite serious, 36% cuts, and That is, of course, something which is not acceptable, but this is simply the difficult times we live in. So, and also job security and job perspectives are very important. Now, if you look at the next slide, what is the impact of COVID? I will not go into details because it affects all sectors, of course, and we try to give responses. At European level, at least, we try to give two different responses. One is on policy, and the other one is on funding. We live in a very, I would say, almost like a paradoxon that suddenly funding is not a problem anymore, at least at European level. It is if we invent the money, it's not true, but we have foreseen 700 billion in the recovery program. So, okay, future generation will need to pay it. I will not say that, but that it's not as simple as that, but the funding is, at least at European level, not really the problem, but where does the money and who gets the money? And I found it very interesting. I will come back to that. And the next slide, you will see our policy responses. But before I talk about that, I just wanted to show you four examples from some countries who have already put money aside for apprenticeship, and particularly for SMEs, because they suffer more, as we also heard from the survey. But these figures in France, Austria, Denmark, Germany, I also heard about the Netherlands, shows also how Europe is divided. And we don't want Europe to be divided, and we don't want the whole world to be divided. So we need solutions in each country. And Hervé said at the very beginning, our priority is to support countries. And that is actually what our role is. And I hope we have the good solutions and the good proposals ready. If I see, I just want to give you a few, in a second, next slide, an overview of what is upcoming at European level, because normally, if things go right, we will on 1st of July come up with some really important policy initiatives. Because of the youth unemployment, back as in 2012, at the end, let's say, of the financial crisis, we see that the youth unemployment is an issue again, and we will come up with a youth employment support package with a reinforced youth guarantee and a council recommendation on the modernization of TVET. Particularly in this context, the European Alliance for Apprenticeship will again reinforce. Not only at sector level, we need to do more at local and region level. We need to do more also to cooperate with the ILO, by the way, because the ILO is working a lot on international standards. So there will be a lot for us to do. And of course, we should not forget about the new important policy goals all over the world UNESCO fully shares with us. It's about the greening and the digitalization. In addition to that, we will come up with an updated skills agenda. There will be a skills pact part of it, which is very important, that companies will be on board, the big ones and the small ones, but also social partners and all other key players. And later, but not in July, but after the summer break, we also intend to come up with a digital education plan. Having said that, I would like to say a few words about what I learned from the panel. Sorry if I don't, we'll talk about the speakers. I just mentioned the countries, but what I heard from Turkey was two key words which I found interesting. Resilience, I think that is something we cannot underestimate the importance under this current crisis, and cooperation. I think cooperation is, of course, key. From Malaysia, I learned a lot about the importance of SMEs, but also the role of public spending. I think we need to discuss that later, also part of our group. From Addecco, very important message, need for reskilling, but also there is still a lack of information. So we need to know exactly what to do, and every company needs to find its own way, of course, to react. I found very interesting the concrete solutions, for instance, these COVID angels, and also that you mentioned the individual learning accounts, which are following the example from France, but other countries may also become more important at European level. From the European Apprentices Network, I learned that a clear request that digital accessibility, and she said that means knowledge, should be available for all apprenticeship programs. And I think she's right. From Brazil, I learned that we need concrete solutions for vet schools. And very important, we need to motivate the learners with positive messages. And also very interesting that you use very simple tools like WhatsApp. So sometimes simple tools are, we don't need the most sophisticated ones, but at least the ones which work, we should use. And also she mentioned that companies need to find the right partners. Yes, and the partners are there. Vet schools are ready to help. And from South Africa, and that's my last word, I learned very much that we need proactive approaches. And let's not forget, I think at a global level, to increase the access of vulnerable groups. We should not leave anybody behind. And I come back to what Ashwani said, also that relates to the digital divide, which we should not accept. So I would like actually to thank all of you, particularly the audience, to listen. I think this was a very interesting start, this webinar, which has been recorded. We will write a report, and Ashwani said it will be ready end of July. So you can all be able to read the support. And we are now thinking in the interagency group to have a second round, to maybe develop some case studies, also to draw some policy recommendations out of this webinar. So I'd like to thank the panelists. I would like particularly thank the host. And I really hope that the future is not only virtual, so that we also have possibilities to meet each other in real. And thanks for the host. And I would like to wish you a wonderful day. Thanks a lot.